As we know, or we have been led to believe that he had no known official position within the CIA, nor it is known that he had any involvement in any covert operation after 1973. However, we find out that in May 1983, Private Citizen Helms was pardoned by President Reagan, you know that because of his involvement with the Chilean affair. And in May 1983, he received a William Donovan Medal. And you know that medal is primarily given for the covert operation. During the ceremony, which Helms received his mysterious medal, Helms was greeted with a returning war hero welcome. William Casey also praised Helms.
Mm-hmm.
So did Bush. However, in a letter from President Reagan, he saluted Helms, I quote, for his commitment to the call of conscience, close quote. Now, Helms replied, and I quote, I am touched and honored. My reason can be no mystery to any of you, close quote. In October of 1983, President Reagan awarded Helms the National Security Medal, the country's highest honor for the work in the area of national security. Apparently, what we know that 1983 medals were generally for the clandestine activity that must remain shrouded in secrecy. Those medals can have no antecedent activity except for his role in the Islamic Republic of Iran and the hostage crisis.
Okay, you know, Farah, at this point, I would like to take another short break for the benefit of the audience, give them again a chance to stretch or perform whatever bodily functions they would like to.
Should I finish this quote from him and then we can do that?
Oh, okay, let's do that, because what I wanted was then to put a postscript on this whole thing. I also wanted to ask you about a recent conference at Columbia University.
Sure.
Okay, go ahead. We'll finish this quote.
Thomas once said, I quote, we are the silent service and the silence begins here, close quote. That's it.
Okay, well, we'll attempt to penetrate that veil of silence as we examine these events in retrospect and look to the future about what we can expect vis-a-vis the alliance between the U.S. national security establishment and Islamic fundamentalism, which, by the way, obviously goes way beyond Iran, the Mujahideen in Afghanistan being one manifestation of the same kind of alliance. But let's take a break now, Farah. We'll come back, and we will put a wrap on this very illuminating interview.
Thank you so much.
Okay, I'm going to put you on hold, and we'll come back in a few minutes.
Sure.
All righty, and that... Well, we're going to be back in a few minutes, and we're going to put a postscript and take a look to the future of this alliance that Fara Mansoor is describing. So after a musical break, we will hear more from Fara Mansoor and his landmark research on the alliance between the Islamic fundamentalists in Iran and the U.S. national security establishment. Welcome back once again, and we're going to conclude now the interview with Fara Mansoor. And let's make sure everything's still working technologically. Good evening, Farah. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay, we're back live on the airwaves. Now, let's take a look at what has happened. You were taking a look at, you quoted from Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. Who are these guys, anyway? So why don't we resume with that reference? You were talking about the awards given to Richard Helms.
That's correct.
For his lifetime service in covert operations.
Right.
Go ahead.
Now we're going to talk about... the man that was put at the State Department director of the Iran desk, Henry Precht. He had known that the trouble was ahead in Iran as early of 1977.
Mm-hmm.
And he worked closely with Richard Helms in Iran while Helms was the U.S. ambassador from 1973-1976. However, according to Moorhead Kennedy, on April 13, 1981, for the benefit of your listeners, the Moorhead Kennedy was one of the hostages in Iran.
Right.
And according to him, on April 13, 1981, there was an award ceremony in the main auditorium of the State Department for the hostages.
Mm-hmm.
Secretary of State Alexander Haig was late. And according to Kennedy, they waited, finally showed up, only, now I'm quoting, he says, only to tell us we, the Reagan administration, would have handled the hostage crisis very differently. Of course, we know that how differently they would have handled it. He pinned the medal of Valor on the charge. I mean, that's Bruce Lingen.
Mm-hmm.
The rest of the hostages being told that since the secretary was running late, we could pick up our medals in a room 1308. Everybody remotely connected with the hostage crisis had received some kind of a prize. Coming up to the stage was the former country director of Iran, Henry Precht. As he joined us on the stage, red-faced, he had the grace to turn his head so he would not have to look us in the eye, and he was given the Superior Honor Award. Everybody had done just a superb job. No question asked or conclusion drawn. Close quote. Then we have got George Cave. George Cave was an official with the CIA, was stationed in Iran where Richard Helms was the U.S. ambassador from 1973, 1976. He had many other activities within the Middle East. He was in Pakistan. After the Iranian Revolution, he went to work in Saudi Arabia. He was fluent in Farsi, Iranian expert. Cave worked closely with Helms for the significant role he played in recruiting and providing intelligence briefing to the hostage takers from August to November 4th, 1979. Mr. Cave was awarded his very own door prize and all expenses paid trip to Tehran as the chaperone for Oliver North and Robert McFarland in 1986. According to the CIA director, Deputy Director of Operation Claire George, that May 1986 trip realized that Mr. Cave's aspiration, I quote, became a player, close quote, in the highly profitable Iran-Contra arms for hostages dealing. Then we have got the Donald Gregg, longtime CIA officer. Donald Gregg was a member of the President Carter's National Security Council. He was responsible for liaison between the White House and the entire intelligence community. That's according to Gary Sick. Gregg had known George Bush since 1967. According to Gary Sick, in the spring of 1980, Gregg had visited Iranian-born arms dealer Cyrus Hashemi in New York office. Gregg had no official responsibility for contact between Cyrus Hashemi and the U.S. government because that was the job that Gary Sick had. At the time, only Gary Sick was the NSC representative for Iran policy. Donald Gregg was Sick's associate. He remained at the NSC until the change of administration in January 1981. In August 1982, he retired from the CIA and joined the staff of Vice President Bush as his national security advisor. In 1989, he became U.S. ambassador to South Korea. Now we have got Frank Carlucci. He was one of the CIA's most successful covert operation expert. In February 78, he was appointed by President Carter, as we have stated, under Stansfield Turner. At the time, Carlucci was warned about the trouble in Iran. He ignored, and he had no interest on that. At least that is the way that appears. Despite his growth in attractiveness, he was promoted to the post of Deputy Secretary of Defense by the new Reagan administration on the very day of their inauguration. And of course, Frank Carlucci has been one of the very, very important individuals within the intelligence community, as we know that he was in Brazil during the Brazilian coup. He was in Africa during the time that Patrice Lumumba was actually assassinated. He became the American ambassador to Portugal during the leftist junta government within that, and also in 1980 he played a very, very important role in the covert operation that took place in South Yemen. And as we have mentioned, that he brought Eric von Marbot, a Pentagon ace troubleshooter, as the head, who was the head of the Defense Security Assistance Agency, DSAA, the Pentagon Arms Cells Division, to be one of his consultants when he became involved with the Sears World Trade. In 1982, Carlucci left the Pentagon when he went to the Sears World Trade, And with Iran-Contra scandal breaking the news, as we have talked about it earlier, on March 31st, 1986, Reagan appointed him the National Security Advisor to succeed Vice Admiral John Poindexter. Reagan having issued a directive we talked about, Carlucci right now, serving as a member of Carnegie Endowment National Commission on America and New World. According to its chairman, former U.S. Ambassador to China, Winston Lord, I quote, "The United States has only its third chance this century to reshape world affairs," and the beat goes on.
Right.
Then we have got the General Secor, was no stranger in the Iranian affair from 1963 when the Khomeini was arrested in June 4th, 1963 after the inflammatory speech that he made and the alliance that he had with Ayatollah, with General Vali Gharani. General Secor was in Iran, and he was in Iran till 1965. Then he served as advisor to Iranian Air Force. Coincidentally, during that time, the Shah had arrested Khomeini, as we mentioned, by certain American special forces. Then Secor became involved from mid-70s when he returned to Iran, serving 4 tour of duties as the head of U.S. Air Force Advisory Group in Tehran, and was in charge of all U.S. armed sales to the Iranian Air Force from 1975 to 1979 as a commander of 1,200-man U.S. Technical Advisory Team. He was charged with the task of building the Shah's Air Force into the power in the Middle East. As we know, in early 1979, Secor was working at the Pentagon as a director of military assistance and sales for the Air Force when the Egyptian-Israeli peace treaty was signed. At that time, Edwin Wilson and 2 other friends of his, Theodore Shackley, who was the former deputy director of the CIA under George Bush, and Thomas Klein, Secor's best friend, set up the Egyptian-American Transport and Services Company called ITSCO, E-A-T-S-C-O, with an Egyptian partner. In 1980, Secor was involved in the planning of President Carter's hostage rescue attempt. Coordinating the ground effort in Iran was his loyal friend and associate Albert Hakim. You all remember what happened to that rescue operation? What is not well known, however, is the sudden exposure of the mission in the Iranian press 2 days before it occurred, as I stated it tonight.
Right. By the way, the ITSCO scandal involved the transferring of weapons, the sales of weapons to Egypt following the Camp David Accords. And it's something that we went into in Radio Free America number 4. And again, I would note the research done all the way back in 1983 by Donald Freed, who noted the Miles Copeland article, which appeared in the Washington Star and was carried in a number of other newspapers, including the San Jose Mercury News here in the Bay Area, which basically revealed the hostage rescue attempt plan before it took place, and note Richard Secor's primary role in the Desert One rescue attempt. And, of course, Secor, an individual who stood to benefit from the status quo rather than the rescuing of the hostages. Go ahead.
And on April 18, 1983, Secor formally joined Albert Hakim to Stanford Technology, and their business did not do all that well until William Casey strongly urged Oliver North to use Secor and Hakim to handle all the Iran-Contra arms transaction, as we have noted it in the past, a nice little reward for their invaluable contribution that they made to Reagan-Bush election efforts. Casey, however, told North that Secor was a doer and had been unfairly taught by his ties with Wilson. Casey liked Secor and continued to do business with him despite Deputy Director Claire Joe's explicit recommendation to have nothing to do with General Secor. Now, that actually concludes some of the materials that we have talked about. Now, for the next session, I think that we would touch off on the surprise that I have, that it would go to the extended relationship of Albert Hakim and his partners in selling arms during the Shah's regime to the Iranian Air Force, and also some part of his former associates that they were able to sell certain equipment for the enrichment of uranium to Iran by 1976, and we touch on that subject later on. Now, you mentioned something earlier about the Columbia University in January 13th, that there was a meeting taking place over there at the Middle Eastern Institute, that Mr. Ibrahim Yazdi was invited to go over there to speak at that closed session seminar. And on that, I called Gary Sick on January 12, 1993, and I introduced myself, and I also made a reference to him in regard to the conversation that I had on Carol Hemingway show, which we didn't have much chance to talk, and he acknowledged that he remembered that time, and I told him what I am doing, and I have been following his October Surprise writing very keenly, and I'm very familiar with much of his material that he has written. And my question that I wanted to ask him was why Ibrahim Yazdi, who played an active role in the Iranian hostage crisis, was speaking over there, and he acknowledged that that meeting is going to take place within the closed-door meeting, and it's the membership-only group. Now, we have to remember that this is the Middle Eastern Institute at Columbia University that has got the membership-only group. Now, I found out later on that that institute is headed by Professor J.C. Horowitz, and he is the Pentagon historian. And the reason that these meetings are closed within the academic circle at the Columbia University, because the people that are member of that association, they have to have a top, according to some investigation that I have done, that it's they have to have a top security clearance. And I was very concerned, and I told Gary Sick that the concern that I have, I believe, is the subject that Mr. Yazdi is going to be talking about, and that was democracy and Islam. And I said I recall correctly that on December 12, 1978, when Mr. Yazdi was having a meeting with Henry Preck in U.S., Yazdi assured him and also the American that there would be freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, and furthermore, he told us that there would be such a freedom to the extent that the people would even be able to attack Islam and criticize Islam, and then we found out later on that wasn't the case.
Now, bear in mind that Yazdi became the deputy prime minister and later foreign minister under Khomeini, and of course the Khomeini regime was brutally repressive of any political opposition whatsoever. Yazdi also an American citizen, correct?
That's correct. And also he was the presiding judge in some of the revolutionary court when many hundreds of the Iranians were brutally assassinated and murdered. Including
friends and colleagues of yours in the resistance.
That's correct.
Okay.
And when and I told Gary Sick about the 80 Iranian security forces that he took to the embassy on the direction of Mashallah Kashani and introduced them to Ambassador Sullivan. I went through the whole thing with him, who in fact was a CIA and Sabak trainee, referring to Mashallah Kashani. And according to Sullivan, I told him that they were trained to be a part of SWAT squad team. And I went through all of that, and I also said it is also a concern to me that between August 79 and October 79, Mr. Yazdi was being provided intelligence briefing by George Cave and Robert Clayton Ames, which I would like to know what was the context of all those intelligence briefings. And I found it, and I told him that I found it very interesting among all those people who have played a very important role in suppressing the Iranian people and creating such a repression in Iran, the Iran Khomeini's regime. He, among those people who was suspected to be the CIA agent, while the same intelligence briefing was provided to Amir Intizam is in jail, but Mr. Yazdi is not. And he replies and he says, yeah, well, I guess, first of all, Mr. Yazdi is coming over here and he's going to be speaking for us, and that's about it. And he was asking me, he says, is it your idea that Mr. Yazdi shouldn't be talking over there? And I, of course, explained to him, no, that's not what I want. I would like him to come and speak, but I want to have that speech to take place in an open door so other people could participate, and at least if you are closing the door, at least have the papers to come out so we can know what you guys are going to be talking about behind the closed door and making decision on the behalf of the Iranian people. And he reluctantly actually told me that this information is not going to come out. And I went through most of the things that I have talked tonight, and he told me, that's Gary Sick, that while I understand your point, as I say, our seminar is for members only, and it's a closed door, and it has been since 1970. And he asked me, what am I saying? Well, he doesn't understand. I'm not sure what voice you think would be the correct voice, asking me. And I told, well, I think any voices that really concerns itself with the democracy. And I don't think that, for instance, Mr. Yazdi could give us any indication what democracy is, when in fact he was a part of the ruling circle in Iran, and he was in fact the violator of every democratic principle in Iran. And Gary Sig at that time said, well, I understand your point, and he went on, and he said to me that I can assure you that there would be very difficult questions to be thrown at Mr. Yazdi. We probably had 1,000 speakers from people representing different viewpoints from every country in the Middle East. And he says that I disagree with you about Mr. Yazdi's role, and he says that he resigned over the hostage-taking in 1979.
Okay, now we should bear in mind that this conference was on the subject of democracy and Islam.
That's correct.
Okay, obviously two things which proved to be incompatible in the fundamentalist government of Yazdi, Khomeini, etc.
That's correct. Now, and when he says that, when Gary Sikh said that Yazdi resigned over the hostage-taking, I was kind of baffled by that statement, because when Prime Minister of Iran, which was Mehdi Bazargan, when he resigned over the hostage-taking on November 6, 1979, obviously all the ministers under him would be forced to resign. I mean, it wasn't that he resigned because of the hostage crisis. Yazdi was a very influential individual within Iranian politics. After he was taken off, I mean, he came out of the foreign ministry, but then later on he became the member of the Iranian parliament under Khomeini. And he said, Gary Sikh, that he has been playing a fairly interesting role with Mr. Bazargan as a part of freedom movement. And he went on to say that he feels that some of the members were arrested a couple of years ago, and he went on to say that some of them even were held in jail fairly recently. And I replied, I said, yes, that is true, Mr. Sikh. The only problem is that, and my question is that, why Yazdi was never put in jail? And he acknowledged, and he said to me, that is correct. Now, at that time, he told me that he didn't have a time, and he says, I understand your point. I take your point, understand your concern. I think that Mr. Yazdi has a perfect right to speak to our group, as many other people have spoken to our group before, and he has an absolute right to come and speak to us. And he went on to say, and I quote, I am very pleased that he's coming to speak to us, and we will see what he has to say about democracy and Islam, close quote. And our discussion and conversation went on, and he says that I disagree with you very much. I think that she's very democratic. And my response to him was, of course, Mr. Gary Sikh, from where I'm coming from, the democratically oriented Iranian revolution was stolen from us by the fundamentalist clergy in Iran, and was then dubbed with Islamic Republic of Iran. Of course, it is not your country which it has been taken away from you. I understand where you're coming from.
Mm-hmm.
And then Gary Sick said, yes, I understand, or something in that effect. And then he said to me, he says, if you look at what I have written, you would find that I have said very much the same thing on many number of different occasions. And I replied to him, something in that effect, that it is true, Mr. Gary Sick. And that is true. He has written a lot about what has happened in Iran. But you have written, I told him, you have written a lot of things about Iran, what has happened, but I found it very disturbing when in your entire research that you have done, and many articles and books that you have written, not once you have mentioned the role of General Vali Gharani as Iran's top military officer during Khomeini's regime. Not even once. And I told him furthermore what Gharani's role was prior to the Iranian Revolution, when he was put in place after the 1953 CIA coup as the head of the military intelligence in Iran, and that he made two major coup attempts against the Shah, one in 1958 with the knowledge of John Foster Dulles, another one in 1963 with Kennedy administration knowledge, and he made an alliance with Khomeini in 1963. And I went through that whole thing, and that was the reason that he was awarded his job in 1979. And I told him that I found it very disturbing that in your entire research you haven't mentioned one word of him.
Now, again, refresh us, Fara, what job did he get in 79? I know we discussed this last week.
He became the head of the Iranian military. He was the head of Iran's military chief of staff.
And this is in what month of 79?
Exactly February 11th, 1979.
Okay, so that would have been 3 days before the takeover.
That's correct.
Okay, right. Well, I know we went into this last week, but
yes.
There are an awful lot of names and elements not familiar to the average American or even the somewhat specialized American like myself. So it's good to go through this again.
And then I went through, and I said to him that with all the things that you have written, you haven't mentioned one word in your entire research about George Cave that was providing intelligence briefing to the Iranian, particularly to Mr. Yazdi. But Yazdi and Intizam, they both were receiving, but Intizam is in jail and Yazdi is not. And you never answered the question why he's not in jail.
Mm-hmm.
And that was also with the knowledge of Mr. Warren Christopher. And I had a copy of the secret communique that I told him, and I even quoted that what that communique did say, that Ames' arrival in Tehran on August 21st, 1979, when serious effort were made that if it was feasible, the suggestion was made to conduct rehearsal of briefing with Ames before going to meeting with Iranians, and was signed by Warren Christopher and sent by Henry Preck. I told him that these things were very interesting. What is more interesting to me, I said, was that this matter has never been discussed by a man of your stature who professes to be giving us an historical perspective on what was really behind the October surprise. And that, in that respect, I told him that I beg to differ with you.
Okay, now we're almost out of time, Fara. Moving from this conference, and again, one of the things that's interesting about this conference taking place, and this was just this past month, January of 1993, indicating at least the possibility that the collaboration between the U.S. national security establishment and Islamic fundamentalist forces may be ongoing. And certainly we have seen that same collaboration not only in Iran, but also in Afghanistan as well. And we don't have time this evening, but perhaps in a future visit, Fara, some weeks down the line, we can ruminate about the possibility of a broader goal in that particular cooperation, and then ruminate about the long-term implications. We've got about 5 minutes, Fara. I wonder if you would sum up as best you can some of your thoughts and feelings. We've been over the facts and the particulars of your research in what I think most people would find exhaustive detail. What are your personal thoughts and feelings on this? Obviously, you've lost many friends and associates to the forces that we're talking about, and you yourself, I understand, have received death threats from not only the Islamic fundamentalists in Iran, but also, at least in the early 80s, people on this side, or in the United States, associates of Albert Hakim. Am I correct?
That's correct.
So you are placing your own neck on the line under the circumstances. What I'd like to get your reflections on, Fara, is some of your experiences in attempting to bring this information out. I know you have conducted some interviews with Marlena Smith, an associate of mine, up on KBOO. Marlena was formerly media coordinator for the Christic Institute. Have you found anyone else willing to deal with this enormous research that you've done?
I tried during the last year, at least the last 8 months of last year, and particularly close to the time of the election, to get the attention of the mainstream media. Anywhere from Washington Post, New York Magazine, Esquire Magazine, Atlantic, even some of the progressive, so-called quote-unquote progressive magazine like Nation Magazine.
Mm-hmm.
Even though that I was providing a tremendous amount of material, I found that many of these newspapers were not interested in pursuing that. I have to say that also I have presented quite a few letters to the editors of the LA Times in Los Angeles, which based on some of their own documents or writings in the past, particularly about the nuclear capability of Iran, which was presented in August 22nd, 1979, referring some of their own materials. I presented that if they would have investigated what was behind all these things, maybe they would have found out what was happening with the hostage crisis. I even found that none of those people were interested at the LA Times. It seems to me that the whole research that I have done is in such a magnitude that for many people it's very difficult to believe that such a thing could have taken place in Iran or within the intelligence community. I believe that, for instance, Tom Blanton at the National Security Archives, he felt that the CIA did not have such a capability to go through such a practice in Iran. I am not trying to advocate that there was some sort of a conspiracy that was taking place. However, what I do say that because of the common objectives and the philosophical and ideological views of these two different groups, like Khomeini's fundamentalists and their aspiration for having the fundamentalist regime in Iran, and what the Republicans under Reagan and George Bush, they had in mind, and their vision of the New World Order, that was a very, very natural alliance and natural phenomena that it did take place.
By the way, I would jump in just for a minute, Fara. One of the things that's unfortunate about American political culture, and there are many things, the word conspiracy has come to be a dirty word in our political lexicon, and even the so-called progressive political sector reacts in a Pavlovian fashion when the word comes to mind or comes to voice, and people simply dismiss it with tones of condescension. For that and other reasons, I refer to myself as a political researcher rather than a, quote, conspiracy theorist, unquote. That has become a dirty word, much as liberal became a dirty word in the United States, politically speaking. There's no way you could call yourself a liberal and be proud of it. Obviously, what you are talking about here is, as a matter of public record, a conspiracy, an enormous one and an ongoing one of tremendous historical and geopolitical proportions. But that's basically what intelligence services do. That's what a covert operation is. It's a conspiracy, and there's no need to be ashamed of the word. I don't think that's a particularly useful word in describing operations of this kind. I think it's unfortunate that the people at the National Security Archive are ignorant enough of their own field of expertise that they don't think the CIA, as well as the other intelligence agencies, are capable of pulling something like this off, because they most assuredly are. This and things even more sophisticated, I'm afraid.
But David, there is one thing that is irony here that we should really put our finger on. You know, when there is a relationship between the intelligence community or United States that develops, for instance, in the case of Marcos in Philippines, when the relationship developed, even though that he was a tyrant in that country, America looks at it, or the official version is that is a natural relationship because of the U.S. national interest. We went and had established a relationship with Fernando Marcos, or with the Shah of Iran, or Noriega in Panama. But if you and I, as a political researcher, we go and investigate this, and then say, oh, you see, now the conspiracy theory advocates are coming in. I mean, if we talk about it, it's conspiracy, but if they do it, natural phenomena. Okay? So these are the things that we have to look. Now, one of the problems that I have seen with many researchers that have been done on Iran and U.S. relationship is people, they don't understand that some of these relationships, which is a very complex relationship, complex alliance, if you don't understand that how covert operation works, if you don't understand how the intelligence community spreads out disinformation, you have to distinguish what is information, what is disinformation. You have to distinguish what is the correct analysis of certain events and what is the incorrect analysis of that. The only way that you can ascertain these sort of things is when you have at least studied how the intelligence community operates. Because these are all the different models that they have used. The CIA, the intelligence community around the world, they don't go and try to experiment something. They have done these things before. They know how to get to people. If you understand and if you read the tremendous amount of work and analysis, political analysis, social analysis, religious analysis that it was prepared by the Americans experts at the American embassy in Iran, you would be baffled. They even knew what time these people would take showers.
Well, the resources that are available to the intelligence community are unlimited, literally, both financial and human and technological. And given those resources and given the commitment to using those resources, which is decades old, there is comparatively little which is not accessible to them. Fara, we are out of time. I'd just like you to for this evening, and we will be visiting with you in weeks to come. I have a lot of other material I want to get to, but a couple of closing remarks for our audience who have no doubt been fascinated by your observations and documentation over the last 2 weeks, because we are out of time.
All right. Well, what I would like to say is that my entire effort was not a mere academic exercise, and it was conducting in some sort of a technique that I used the criminal technique of investigating such a matter. And the results, they were all there. No one disputed that, but there are yet a logical explanation as how they got there. And the perpetrators, they have long vacated the scenes of crime, leaving veil of disinformation behind them. But their fingerprints were there, and I looked at those fingerprints very carefully. And the key was in making the connection between all the perpetrators and the fingerprints and basing my conclusion on facts in evidence. And I hope that I have been able to at least relate to your audience my experience. It was not easy.
And this is the first time that much of this has been voiced before in a public forum. Am I correct?
That's correct.
Okay, so
it's never been. And I want to thank you very much. And I hope that your listeners were able to benefit from some of these research and investigation. And I would give them my PO box address again.
Again, we are down nice and slowly for us so people who are taking notes by hand can get this. Go ahead.
That is Fara Mansoor, F-A-R-A, and the last name is M-A-N-S-O-O-R, PO Box 491-234, L.A., California, 90049.
Okay, one more time, nice and slowly, Fara.
Fara Mansoor, F-A-R-A, and the last name is M-A-N-S-O-O-R, and the address is P.O. Box 491-234, L.A., California, 90049.
Okay, Fara, well, we will be visiting with you again in weeks and months to come. On behalf of the audience, I want to thank you for your tremendous efforts and for not just your work, but for the risk that you're taking. And I want to thank you also for providing us with the first opportunity that anyone has had, as I said, in a public forum to hear much of this information, because it is vitally important and it's thrilling to be able to listen to this groundbreaking research of yours.
Thank you so much.
All righty, Fara, we will talk to you in weeks to come. Take care, and we'll be in touch.
Thanks.
All righty.
That's for sure.
Right, and that concludes our interview this evening, and actually over the last 2 weeks with Fara Mansoor. I had a lot of other things that I was going to get to, but in light of the depth and importance of his information, I thought it would be useful to go on and to allow him to stretch out as much as possible. Again, this is the first time that most of that information has ever been revealed in a public format. That concludes the prepared portion of this broadcast. Now, all of our archive broadcast shows are on permanent file with the Tape Duplication Company. The name of that company is Archives on Audio. That's Archives on Audio. They're located at P.O. Box 170023, San Francisco, California, 94117. The phone number is area code 415-346-1840. 415-346-1840. I should also mention that neither myself nor this station makes any money off of this announcement. This is FYI. This is Dave Emory thanking all the listeners for their contributions and encouraging them to tune in again to the next broadcast. Until then, take care.